So, have you ever felt like you just wanted everything to go right? Yeah? You felt this before? Big project, big presentation. Maybe you were working on a sermon, and you get into the church, and something goes wrong with the technology, and we've got no TV. We've got no words on the back screen for our singers. We've got no lyrics for you online. I'm so sorry for that. And if I point to this TV every once in a while on accident, just bear with me, all right? Sort of related, not really. Have you ever felt like you just needed to be right? Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. First service had the same reaction. You can just feel it bubble up. Or its close cousin. You knew you were right, as in everyone else is obviously wrong. Yes, okay, do you agree with me again? Have you ever struggled with an inflated ego? Yeah. It's something we all struggle with from time to time. I've struggled with my pride, needing to have the last word, needing to be right, and I don't know, this surprises some people sometimes. I'm not sure why, but I can have a strong competitive streak too. Get me in a Yuku tournament or a war of words or a game of horse on a basketball court, and you'll see. I have a strong competitive, and my wife can corroborate all of this if you don't believe it. Time and time again, we see in our storytelling, we see this character in movie, on stage, in TV, in books, this character that has an inflated ego. And why are they written about so much? Because they exist. These people exist, this personality, these choices, and oftentimes we see them on a huge scale, which makes their mistakes even bigger, which makes their downfall even harder. We know what's going to happen. The writing is on the wall. Every time we know this character is going to have big consequences. They will fall, and when it's ramped up even on a bigger scale, kingdoms can fall. We see it in the Bible. In the Old Testament book of Daniel, in chapter 5, there's a new leader in Babylon. And he was no longer concerned with the welfare of his constituents. All he cared about was himself and those at the top of his government and his many women. He made a mockery of the people's religious symbols using what were considered sacred chalices that had been earlier plundered from the Jerusalem temple, which he was now using to throw a huge party. His hubris, his exaggerated pride and self-confidence, his self-indulgence would be a signal of the end of his reign, and it would be a signal of the dividing of Babylon. The writing was on the wall. It's a phrase that means that there are signs that something or someone is about to fail, or that there's danger ahead. And as we will see in a little bit, the writing was on the wall, literally. Daniel, the namesake for the biblical book that we are studying this month, would be brought in to read and interpret this mysterious writing when no one else could. And the message would spell out doom for the selfish leader and for the once great and powerful empire of Babylon. So we are continuing in our series today in the book of Daniel. We've walked with Daniel and his friends as they have shown us how to live under empirical rule. But now Daniel is called in to be the reader and the interpreter and the conveyor of an ominous message to the self-indulgent king about a long-standing empire that would soon fall. We will see the perils of an empire that not only seeks to display its power, but then we will see in contrast the real power in humility and mercy. So we start in Daniel chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. King Belshazzar, now, let me stop here. I think we need to do some housekeeping so that we don't get confused this morning. In earlier chapters of this book, Daniel was given a new name by Nebuchadnezzar, which was, wait for it, this is so helpful, Belteshazzar. This is not the same character that emerges today in our story, King Belshazzar. Today, Daniel will only be Daniel, okay? And Belshazzar is King Belshazzar. New character in the story. So King Belshazzar made a great festival for 1,000 of his lords, and he was drinking wine in the presence of the 1,000. Under the influence of the wine, Belshazzar commanded that they bring in the vessels of gold and silver that his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines. Now, remember Kate's list from last week? Now, she pointed out the satirical and exaggerated nature of this type of storytelling. This is making a point about the excess of the feast. So, the kings and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Okay, first things first. The feast itself is a display of power and self-glorification, not unlike the golden idol set up by Nebuchadnezzar in last week's message. And as Kate mentioned, the golden statue was meant to bring glory to Nebuchadnezzar and to his kingdom of Babylon. Hosting this royal feast was an opportunity to display power, to bring glory to Belshazzar and his kingdom. In this case, the glory is reserved for those at the top and in his inner circle. Not only that, there's possibly a famine going on in the kingdom right now. And they're partying with nobility and wealthy friends, and the people he is supposed to be leading are struggling. And in the ancient world, with a famine, probably dying. But then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he adds insult to injury. In chapter 5, verses 3 and 4, it says, "So they brought in the vessels of gold and silver that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, so the king and his lords and his wives and his concubines might drink from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone." So here's what's happening. Back in Daniel chapter 1, Nebuchadnezzar laid siege in Jerusalem and took the religious vessels or the equipment from the temple and placed it in his treasury. Now, in chapter 5, and with Belshazzar in charge, he takes his royal display of power, the feast. He removes the temple vessels that were plundered, and with the host of his partygoers, drinks with the vessels and worships the idols. Then, ladies and gentlemen, things got weird. Daniel 5 through 9 says, "Immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared." Now, I want to pause there. I really want you to get into this because by all accounts, the implication here is a disembodied hand. And if you're struggling to think about that, think of Thing from the Addams Family. It's just a hand, okay? So I imagine it kind of scurries in. There's a hand, but appearing out of nowhere and began writing on the plaster on the wall of the royal palace next to the lampstand. This is supposed to be spooky. The hand, the lamp, it's dark. The text doesn't say this, but I imagine also there's smoke billowing through the room as this happens. If we were going to set the scene like a modern movie, it certainly would. The king was watching the hand as it wrote, Then the king's face turned pale. His thoughts terrified him. His limbs gave way, his knees knocked together. His body was giving out. His face turned pale. We might say it looked like he's seen a ghost. So the king cried aloud to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the diviners. In other words, bring in all the professionals who know what to do right now. And the king said to the wise men of Babylon, whoever can read this writing and tell me its interpretation shall be clothed in purple, have a chain of gold around his neck, and rank third in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar became greatly terrified, and his face turned pale, and his lords were perplexed. The writing is on the wall. And when no one else was able to read and interpret the meaning of this writing, delivered again by the disembodied hand, not even the professionals. So the queen mother remembered Daniel. She remembered that he could interpret dreams as he had done in the past with Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel is brought in, and he starts with a lengthy prelude. He starts with this speech comparing the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, the previous king who made the golden idol, who threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. He compares him with the hardened and proud heart of Belshazzar. Daniel proclaims in chapter 5, verse 20, but when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened, so he acted proudly, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and his glory was stripped from him. Nebuchadnezzar's hardened heart caused him to be exiled from the kingdom and his people. And in chapter 4, when he had the dream, we are told that he lived with and even became like the wild animals. Daniel sees this as an imminent warning for Belshazzar. And you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all of this. You, Belshazzar, have continued in your pride and arrogance, even though you have seen where this leads. And then Daniel's prelude is over. His speech is done, and he gets into the reading and the interpretation. Finally revealed. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. In Daniel 5, 26 through 28, Daniel says, this is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. In other words, your time is up. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your pride, your arrogance, your hardened heart are leaving you empty. And Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Babylon is now divided. The writing was on the wall. His heart had been hardened. His lack of humility and mercy was his downfall. And now his kingdom would end. Divided and broken, they would fall. Verse 31 says, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, which is another way to say the Babylonian king, was killed. And Darius the Mede, alluding back to the kingdom being split between the Medes and the Persians, Darius the Mede received the kingdom. So we have heard over and over this morning about the dangers of exaggerated pride. A hubris, we might call it. But now we are going to see how to fight against the draw of dangerous power and ego and pride. Nebuchadnezzar, as we mentioned earlier, had a hardened heart, which caused him to be exiled from his kingdom and his people. The story of Nebuchadnezzar's pride and Belshazzar's pride really go together. In the book of Daniel, it's chapter 4 and it's chapter 5. They are both about kingly and empirical ego. They both have Daniel to come in and interpret. Nebuchadnezzar has him come in to interpret his dream. Belshazzar has him come in to interpret the writing on the wall. And Daniel's interpretation of Belshazzar's situation draws heavily on Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The whole prelude is about what Belshazzar failed to learn from Nebuchadnezzar's woes. So if we look back at chapter 4, what is it that Nebuchadnezzar failed to do? In Daniel's interpretation of the dream, he states that redemption and reconciliation can be found by doing what is right and to remove your wrongdoing by showing mercy to the poor. Nebuchadnezzar failed to accomplish that goal. And this is exactly what Belshazzar failed to do. Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar were plagued by a common inflated ego. But the antidote to this kind of soaring ego is a heaping dose of loving mercy. And you've probably heard this before. Have you heard of mercy? Have you heard of the goodness in mercy? It's a core characteristic of following Jesus. In Matthew 12, we see Jesus lifting up mercy over religious law in order to feed those who needed to eat. It says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. But he answered, haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Or haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. In terms of the law, you could make the case that they were guilty, but for Jesus, loving mercy triumphs over the letter of the law. In contrast, Belshazzar desecrated the vessels from the temple to display his own power and achievement and in glory and might, while ignoring those in need. And it was a display that marked the end of his rule and the dividing of the once mighty Babylonian Empire. But in light of feeding those who needed to be fed, what was seen by the Pharisees as the desecration of the Sabbath is seen by Jesus as showing mercy. See, Jesus is actually quoting Hosea 6:6 when he says, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. The knowledge of God. To know the heart of God is to know the power of mercy. And the word mercy here is a translation of the Hebrew word chesed. If that sounds familiar, Kate actually used this word chesed in her connection with the importance of caregiving in our Live Free series last month. And she said, chesed is expanded in our scripture translations to loving kindness, mercy, compassion, care, goodness. This love is generous and committed. So loving kindness, mercy, compassion, care, goodness, these become the antidote to toxic power and inflated egos, or any power that divides people into worthy and not worthy, guilty by the law or innocent, for I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And mercy, all of these, become some of the most important markers for following Jesus that we can find. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's the Samaritan who showed mercy. Not the priest or the Levite, not the ones who carried the right membership card. Jesus was asked where real, eternal, age-long life is found. The answer, love God and your neighbor. Well, who is my neighbor? Jesus says, stop asking that question and just go start being a good neighbor. That's how you love God. Well, then how do I be a good neighbor? Be like the one who showed mercy. As Jesus said in that parable, go and do the same. Don't let power and hubris and exaggerated egos get a hold on you or in your heart. That's how our hearts become hardened. The story of the writing on the wall is a cautionary tale about lack of humility and mercy. Caring for nobility and displays of power and achievement over and above the needs of all the people. Worshiping the power, the false power of idols, while not being transformed by the very character of God who is love and whose signature is mercy. As we mentioned, this is something that can affect all of us. But like Belshazzar, when that level of a hardened heart reaches the highest levels, void of loving kindness and mercy and compassion and care and goodness, when it reaches the highest levels, that's how kingdoms fall. That's how empires collapse. It's the sign of an ending. Now, Daniel is widely classified in the biblical literary genre of apocalypse. Now, this might sound intense, especially to our ears. Think about apocalyptic movies, okay? But the word really means revelation. Literally, the Greek word apocalypsis means uncovered or revealed. In biblical and other ancient apocalyptic works, they are typically highly symbolic, coded, sometimes quite bizarre. Does that sound familiar? Like our story today. They may predict signs of the coming of an end. But at its core, it's a revelation of divine truth. Now, there's a New Testament book that is also classified as an apocalypse. Any guesses? I'll give you a hint. Look at the second line, first word. Revelation. Revelation is classified as an apocalyptic work. The oppressive empire of Babylon that physically came to an end with our story of Belshazzar would continue to be used as an archetype in the Bible and extensively in the book of Revelation. As a representation, as the representation of the oppressive Roman Empire, but also ultimately any culture that becomes oppressive or drunk on its own power or obsessed with its own greatness. As Scott McKnight points out in his book, Revelation for the Rest of Us, the earmarks of empire, which is the identity of Babylon as he puts it in the book, are exceptionalism, nationalism, and militarism. When we are more concerned with personal and national exceptionalism than collective goodness, then the writing may be on the wall that we are experiencing some markers of Babylon. When people are oppressed and treated unfairly, then it's possible that the writing may be on the wall. And when we are more concerned with individual rights, individual wealth, and individual needs than the welfare of all the people, then the writing may be on the wall. However, it's not all doom and gloom. There's an antidote to this kind of power, and that is mercy and humility. We learned it from the book of Daniel. We learn it from Jesus, where real life for us and others and for the whole world comes from our capacity for mercy, or our expanded definition of chesed, loving kindness, mercy, compassion, care, and goodness. And all of this is an outgrowth of love. So if we find ourselves living among the markers of Babylon, or we see the markers of Babylon in the church, if we see the markers of Babylon in ourselves or in our nation, then our job is to be the light that shines through the muck with the very mercy of God. That is our witness. In Matthew 5:14-16, Jesus says, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Our light, our love, our joy, our good deeds, our mercy is the witness of a life that mirrors Christ. And this can become a continued revelation, a continued apocalypse, if you will, an uncovering of divine wisdom that points us back toward the character, the very mercy of God. Our job isn't to sit in our ego and say, well, this isn't Babylon. We're not like Babylon. I'm not like Babylon. Letting our hearts become hardened, like what happened with Belshazzar. Our job is to see where oppression exists, see where there are people in need, shatter those bonds that keep some people at the top and some people at the bottom. On a smaller scale, see where someone needs a kind word or a loving smile. See where someone needs a gentle reminder that they, no matter who they are, that they are made in the image of God, loved by God. Show them that they are loved by you. This is a demonstration of mercy in the world. Let's try believing that this is the antidote for toxic egos and power and oppression, and let's see how that changes us. Let's see how that changes the world. Our job is to flee and to help others flee from the markers of Babylon, away from our hubris, and then finding our allegiance in the kingdom of the God who is love. It's the kingdom that endures. In the kingdom where power is reversed, where mercy and not might always wins. We are coming to our time of communion, so if you want to find your cups. Also, I mentioned earlier, we've had some technology problems this morning, which has kept my brain so busy. I did not bring communion up here with me. Jason, thank you. Oh, I got 2. Here. I got 3. Okay. Thank you, everybody. So kind. I'll tell you what, I'm having a good morning. Like, it makes you feel a little frazzled when things aren't going exactly, like, things aren't working exactly right, but like, I'm having a wonderful morning. Love you guys. At the beginning of the message, we saw that Belshazzar had a feast for his nobility, and his women, and his inner circle. And again, there was possibly a famine going on at the time, and he has no concern for the people. But the Apostle Paul's instructions for the Lord's Supper, the Lord's feast, are exactly the opposite. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, he encourages equity among the church when they gather for the meal that honors the name and the heart and the character of Jesus, marked by mercy and not by shame. That all who come to the table may receive their literal fair share of the feast, not going hungry. And spiritually as well, that they would receive their fair share of nourishment spiritually. No shame, only mercy. Communion comes from the Greek word koinonia, which means common or partnership. So this feast, this communion that we share is an expression of the love and mercy that we receive in partnership with one another and as citizens of God's kingdom who are fleeing the markers of Babylon and traps of ego, seeking the good and flourishing and life of the age for the whole world. Paul then goes on, after encouraging this common meal where no one goes hungry, where everyone gets what they need. He goes on in verse 23 and says, on the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took some bread, and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and said, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Let's take this together. In the same way, he took the cup of wine after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. Let's take this together. Let's pray. God, would you lead us to be a light that shines your mercy in and through us for the life and flourishing of the world. God, may that be expanded in us. Mercy, loving kindness, goodness, care. All of this an expression of the love that you taught us. As we flee from the markers of Babylon, as we seek to be not trapped in our egos and our pride and our hubris, but God, as we seek your kingdom, seek to be marked by the goodness that flows from you, so that ultimately it would become true, what we prayed this morning, that your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. God, hear our prayers. Amen.